Hello and welcome to another video. Thanks for joining. Thought I'd start something new today and do the first episode in a series. You may have watched my Christmas episode recently, and I just wanted to do something a little bit similar, but more kind of historical and just broaden the horizons a bit with this one. So, this is the first episode in the series called Reviving Lost Stories. And today I wanted to look at the story of Inanna and her descent into the underworld, which is one of the oldest stories that we know of, if not the oldest story, in fact. Uh, Written by well, we're not sure quite who, but we know we have some hymns related to Inanna, who is one of the preeminent female deities in the Sumerian pantheon. Sumer being the land of ancient Mesopotamia, just towards the east of the land of Israel. And here we have a picture of a relief that's been found of Inanna, or that's the best hypothesis of this, because two of her frequent symbols that she's seen with are the lions that are at her feet, and also the owls, which are flanking her there. Another name for Inanna is Ishtar. That may be one you're more familiar with. And throughout this, there's a lot of different minor variations between different languages and dialects, even though the myth of Inanna really was ubiquitous, it seems, in the ancient world, or at least the motif that she represents. So yeah, I'm hoping to dive a little more into this and see what this ancient story, if any, what meaning it has for us now. And for me, this is a very, very important exercise because it's something which these are simply the oldest stories that we have, and within these stories, you have similarities with the Bible, but there's also differences. And yeah, just for me, it's always fascinating to reflect on thinking about the specific types of history that we tend to be taught in schools and what society tends to focus on with written stories in particular, rather than these kind of ancient poems being at the forefront of what we're taught, and as we try to understand the human experience and our sense of identity and place in the world. So, yeah, I mean, to kind of give a bit of historical, geographical context to this, which I think is important to understand the development of culture and the way in which religion is this kind of constantly morphing and evolving thing in response to the environment and the people that are the ones who are spreading the ideas. Well, if you take the biblical account of Abraham, who is one of, but essentially, according to the canon as it currently is, and the Jewish kind of history that they have of themselves, there's this concept that Abraham was chosen by God, and that the well, for people that are Islamic, they tend to believe that the chosen son of Ishmael was the chosen son of Abraham was Ishmael, whereas for the Jews it would tend to be Isaac's regarded as the promised son. Um, that's an interesting kind of divergence to analyze and discuss in and of itself, but just to kind of try and set this in its as context to the Inanna story, I think it's important to realize that even within the Bible as it currently is, and the ancient Jewish conception of the origin of them as a people, uh, they believe that Abraham came from Babylon, ultimately from a place called which is even further east from Babylon, the capital, what would become the capital at least. So already there's this kind of concept that Abraham comes from this culture, and there's already this lineage that is established there with within the Bible itself with these ancient Mesopotamian religions, uh, as this is kind of regarded as the place where humans originated. And if you believe in the concept of the flood and Noah's Ark, then this would be the kind of area that they would have landed around Turkey and Mesopotamia. Before then, people spread out and start building towns and settlements next to the rivers, which you can see all down here, like the Tigris and the Euphrates. So this, I mean, straight away for me, as soon as I understood where Ur is geographically and what it means that Abraham comes from there, and he is someone that's chosen by God, and someone who refers to God by a different name to the one which the Jews now say is the only name, and Christians have kind of carried on in that monotheistic way. They've said that the only way you can refer to God is with this tetragrammaton, or you can only use other titles like Adonai rather than some other kind of word, which, especially words which are borrowed from other languages. So if you, for example, in the Bible, Ishtar, Inanna, she's called Asherah, is often how she's translated, and there's this idea of Asherah poles that go along with that. And throughout the Old Testament, they're kind of denounced, and they're often, according to the canon, as in its current form, the prophets themselves, some of them say that that's the reason why God has allowed the Babylonians to invade and scatter them and take over, is because people have been worshipping these gods that are foreign in some way. And there's this very kind of nationalistic, kind of ethno-state concept that kind of germinates in this environment, in this place in the world where this people group who have been in exile numerous times in Egypt first, which is where Abraham ended up at the end of his journey, and before then he went to the promised land. He had to go through Egypt first, had a whole saga with his wife and the Pharaoh there, according to Genesis, which I'd recommend checking out for yourselves. But, you know, there's this kind of like almost cyclical experience that a lot of people in this region who speak the Semitic languages, specifically Hebrew, they experience this kind of exile again and again, and as a result, it seems they've kind of developed this more patriarchal, nationalistic monotheism, which now dominates Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But this, this patriarchal concept wasn't always present the in the region, and even within the Bible, we know that different kings at different times put up these Asherah poles and make cakes for the Queen of Heaven, especially the women in Jeremiah. They're the ones who say that they make these cakes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, perhaps, and what they are. But just to keep it moving, so this is the Ishtar Gate, which is from ancient Babylon, and it's a beautiful piece of art. Obviously, somehow ended up in Germany after some conquest, I'm sure. And yeah, here we have one of the lions that is most frequently associated with Ishtar, with this deity, which is interesting to think about then, terms like the Lion of Judah, what the kind of association would have been with these animals in the ancient world, and thinking about the way in which the stories that we now read in the Bible might have meant something very different to people who had the proper context to understand the entities being discussed, rather than it just being this very kind of distant, abstract thought as it is currently, in the way that we kind of conceive as primitive nature-based religions as just, completely crazy and just delusional, and because people don't know anything, rather than being, rather than it being a way of believing and being in the world that has the power to transform your life for the better. And I think now we're rediscovering that as people are realizing that as religion declines, there is some kind of hole, that there's some role that religion was fulfilling, which when you take it away, then there's something that's lacking. There's something which there's not the vehicles for change and the tools that you have and the stories that you have to be able to transform yourself and relate to different motifs and archetypes. If that is lacking, then and instead we have these kind of whoever, person or celebrity which you people follow instead, in a kind of quasi-religious way. I mean, of course, everyone's human, so they'll let you down, but it's kind of like these myths are that much more kind of like reified that it just there's something timeless about them, and that's, I think, what I want to share with this series is these kind of timeless stories, which I feel like it's a shame that we've lost them, and it's a shame that these what these poems that have been transmitted for thousands of years by with the word of mouth as well as writing, uh, have been lost and are not studied and not given the reverence that they should be given for the meaning and the and everything else that they have been able to provide for the people who have repeated them, and the way in which it expresses their struggle and their hopes, fears, dreams, their psychic consciousness, and consider how that relates to us and how we share the same struggles as them, and not see them in this way that it's like we are now enlightened and they're all stupid and they didn't know what they're doing, because that kind of attitude is itself the beginning of delusion, I think. Because it's the start of philosophy, or that I know is that I know nothing, according to Socrates, or Plato, who says according to Socrates. But the kind of idea being that you don't know what you don't know, and is you have to be open, you have to be willing to learn new stories and be aware that you're part of the story, and that the story is constantly changing and everything is in flux. And I think that's what the feminine represents, and that's what certainly the story of the descent of Inanna, I think, represents as one of the first, if not the first, rebirth stories and death and resurrection tales. Here we just got another nice image of her, and this is, at the start of this story. I'll kind of summarize it for you, but please read it for yourselves. It's so wonderful that we have, they've actually found tablets that are like from 2000 BC, just older than anything that we possibly have, considering the oldest copies of the Bible that we have are maybe 300 BC, 600 if you're really pushing it and being generous. But 2000 BC is really old. And yeah, we have these stories, and I'll try and kind of summarize the kind of gist of the plot. But by all means, please go and check out the translations. Although I'm sure the translations don't quite capture the full meaning of how could they ever, with the language being so different, and the way in which you just can't understand the way it would have, like, even the rhythm of the words, and the hidden meaning of ancient Sumerian, or whatever they're written in Akkadian, which probably is an old, predates kind of Hebrew in terms of the history of language, but it's in the kind of Semitic branch again, which proves the kind of connection between the biblical Jewish tales and these ancient Babylonian myths, and the shared heritage that they have. But without understanding the language, you can't understand the way in which the rhyme would have unlocked some additional meaning, or the particular way that something is phrased. But nevertheless, I'd heartily recommend checking out the story for yourselves. That said, yeah, so at the start of the story, well, here we've got an image of her kind of like clothed in with all of her finery, and her lions there. But so in terms of in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which might be something that you've heard of. So there's a variety of different hymns about Inanna and the descent, or exalting her, or other stories which involve her. You also have the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is probably the most famous kind of epic tale that's similar to the Iliad or something like that in Greek world. That would be the kind of counterpart. But although of course they each works in their own regard. But so in this tale, which focuses around Gilgamesh, it's also been offered as another kind of proof that this global catastrophe happened around the Younger Dryas period, in what we'd now date as 12,000 years ago ish, using the way we currently define the second and time. That's another video entirely again. But yes, if this global catastrophic event occurred, which is recorded in different cultures all the way around the world, in the Mesopotamian one, you have this person Gilgamesh, who is one of the people who survives that event and then goes on to found the kingdom of ancient Babylon. So it's a way of Babylon explaining their origin in a similar way that Rome will have myths about Romulus and Remus and that kind of thing. You know, it's like a founding origin myth. So of course, I'm not trying to say, I mean, in all of this, I don't think that history is necessarily actually the thing which is the most important, because in many ways, it's like, it's so hard to hold on to, because I really do think that it is all just stories at the end of the day. And we can get into that in any number of angles, the multiverse not being least among them. But, you know, thinking about, you know, what literally happened, I think isn't the most important thing. What's more important, and what's more actually, you know, productive in a way for your personal life, and to be able to make the future better and the present better too, is to think about the way in which these stories reflect the psychological contents of the people who wrote them, and then think about what that says about humanity and its development, and who you are as a result of that, rather than focusing on the details too much. It's like not zooming out and seeing the bigger picture. Anyway, so in the story, Gilgamesh, at some point after he survives this flood, and you've got the Anunnaki, and I maybe probably pronounced that wrong, but they're like the gods in Mesopotamian mythology, and basically at some point he meets Inanna, and she's the goddess of love, and she's also has the title the Queen of Heaven. So there's this moment where effectively she tries to kind of like flirt with him or whatever, and he kind of turns her down, and then as a result she's kind of scorned. She, in her rage, she gets her sister's husband, who's this like great bull, whatever, you know, mythical, hard to beat creature, and then he sends him to attack Gilgamesh. But Gilgamesh kills the bull, and then as a result, that's then now the setup to the story of Inanna's descent. So then, as a result of this series of events, in some way she feels responsible. She is responsible for the death of her sister's husband, because she sent him off to fight someone who scorned her. So there's this story where she goes down into the underworld to try and get his soul, his spirit back, and bring him back. And well, I think actually it's just to sit with him. I think that's maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself and I've spoiled the kicker of the story, but yeah, I think she just goes down to be with him, to make sure that, you know, he gets the proper rights and things like that. And she descends down into the underworld, which is, if you think about it and analyzing it in this kind of Jungian psychological way, can be seen as basically the confrontation of the shadow, as Inanna the woman, whoever it is that came up with this story, is processing her grief at the role that she has played in the death of a loved one. And she descends into the underworld, and this is this process of self-reflection and critique. And she meets in the end the goddess of death, and the goddess demands that uh, for whatever Inanna wants, whether it's the resurrection or for his soul, the bull's soul to go wherever. Uh, she says that Inanna has to be hung. Basically, the price is her life that she has to pay. That's the final price that she has to pay to redeem this soul from the underworld and to redeem herself for the role that she has played in that death. And so she sacrifices herself, and on the journey down, she loses all of her finery and she's just naked when she arrives there to death. And then she dies, and she is hung on a hook for 3 days and 3 nights. And that is significant in of itself because, well, I should realize I don't know when I'm going to put the pictures in, but I think this image of this woman in the roots, I think that's really sums up the this feeling of being underground, this feeling of, and that's why hell is often conceptualized being in the center of the earth. It's like it's this place within yourself, and in that way it is a state of mind. And I don't believe that hell is a place you'll burn forever in eternity. Hell is right now, kind of thing. This isn't paradise, and it certainly isn't. So and in that way, I mean, I do feel like this is purgatory kind of thing. And then it's like, do you get out? Do you exit the simulation, and do you unplug yourself from the game and realize and connect with the source and this spiritual world that stories like Inanna's offer you? Or do you just focus on the world, things you can see, and are distracted by the way that companies and people want you to do and focus your attention and believe? But yeah, I think that Inanna, her story is just so powerful for the way it symbolizes this kind of death to self, and this sitting in the darkness, down with the roots of who you are, what you are, why you do what you do. And when you sit with that long enough, you realize that there are things you want to change, and there are things that have to change if your honor is to be restored, if you are to redeem yourself and those around you. And well, I mean, Christ is also perhaps, well, he is the most well-known figure that also stands for this motif and symbology of rebirth. And there's all kinds of connections between the two in the way that Jesus says, he claims the title, the Morning Star, which is Inanna's title, because the morning star is Venus, the planet, and that Venus is just a later word for Inanna. I mean, the Babylonians are the ones who created mathematics as we know it and mapped the stars. So, and even the concept of the 3 days and 3 nights, that's something which is shared between Inanna and Jesus when Jesus goes down into the underworld. But just to kind of really cement this parallel before I touch on more of the kind of astrology of it and why the 3 days corresponds to the cycle of Venus, I just wanted to read a quick extract from the end of towards the end of the story of Inanna's descent. Is when there's the ascent. She comes out because basically she manages to rise again because she tells her servant to go to the other gods to mourn and get their help if she dies in her efforts to redeem herself and get this her sister's husband back from the dead. So her servant goes to some of the gods. Some of the gods say, no, I'm too busy, or she should do it herself, whatever. The god of wisdom, Enki, he takes pity on her, or is he loves her, and he wants to help, and he does, and he sends these creatures down to Death to bargain with her, and these entities sit with Death in her mourning, because Death herself, the Queen of Death, is mourning Inanna's death. And this is the way in which you really see that the Queen of Death is just a part of Inanna's psyche. And it's and and that's the part of her which is expressing the grief that death brings, as well as the part you have the part of her which has to die. You have the part of her that mourns that death, and then there's these entities which sit with her, that the god of wisdom, Father Enki, sends, and as a result of sitting with her and comforting her and copying and echoing back what Death's lamentations are. Death, she says, what do you want? And they say, we want Inanna's body. And Death says, fine, take her body. And then these two entities, which are like water and the food of life personified. So, I mean, you could go into a whole thing about that in itself and discussing the way that that motif appears in Christianity and other religions, but they effectively revive her, and then she ascends back through all the different levels of the underworld. Is just about to exit with these two beings that have been sent to nourish her from the god of wisdom, the water of life and the food of life. And so here we go. So then it says, Inanna was about to ascend from the underworld when Anuna, the judges of the underworld, seized her. They said, no one ascends from the underworld unmarked. If Inanna wishes to return from the underworld, she must provide someone in her place. And then there's a little interlude where they encounter different people in Inanna's life. She returns home and she says, no, not them, because of this reason, this reason, this reason. And then in the end, she gets home to her husband, who is called Demuzi. That's one of his names. And basically, these entities, these demons that are like yapping at Inanna's heels as she exits hell, they're like, we need to take someone, we need to take someone. And she kind of lets them take Demuzi, her husband, because she blames him in some way for the way that he's not out, trying to help her or whatever, and he's just in the palace. She, in a rage, she just says, yeah, take him. And then it says, Demuzi's crying out, like, where's the justice? Where's the justice? Why do I have to pay for her mistake? And then, it says he cries out to one of the higher gods, Utu. And then it says at the end of the story, in the translation at least by Samuel Noah Kramer, which I'm not sure which of the tablets this is from, but in one of the variants of the story, in another variant of the story, Demuzi has to like live half in the underworld, half in is allowed to live half with Inanna in the above world. But in this ending, it says that the merciful Utu accepted Demuzi's tears. He changed the feet of Demuzi into snake feet. Demuzi escaped from his demons. They could not hold him. And I mean, I just had to include that one because I love that ending and the metaphor there, and the way that snakes are used as a motif in the end, and interweaving through the story, and the way in which it enables you to see things from the male perspective, from the female perspective, as they just kind of deal with grief and the result of conflict between different people. And yeah, just the emotions that really are conveyed by this story. And I mean, of course, snakes around the pole is also another symbol of the goddess of healing, and also associated with the devil in the story of the Garden of Eden. but also with this kind of Kundalini, rising serpent uh, imagery, which is certainly present in this story, and in other ones involving Inanna as well. I mean, the Tree of Life motif, in fact, is not first recorded in the Bible, as far as we know. I mean, within this discussion, there's always people who will say and claim that the Hebrew myth is older than the Babylonian one. But the problem is that there's no actual evidence to prove that other than just believing that the texts are as old as they claim they are, in the sense that they claim to have been written by Moses and faithfully copied all the way down and never changed. But as I said, the oldest copies of the Bible we have are at the very, it's all Second Temple period, and you've got to remember that the Babylonian exile is around 600 BC, so you don't get any literature from before that because it was all destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar when he destroyed the first temple, or as far as we know, at least in the public domain. I mean, who knows what's actually out there? But yeah, I mean, in terms of what's publicly available and the manuscripts that we know that the oldest story that we have a written record of is the tale of the Tree of Life in Babylonian mythology, where it features Lilith, who is a figure that then appears in Jewish mythology and Apocryphon related to Genesis. Lilith then appears as like another wife of Adam, which is fascinating to look into in herself. But it's a Babylonian word originally, and comes from this story which involves Inanna. And in this story, Inanna and Gilgamesh aren't opposed in the way that they are in the Descent, which is interesting as well, in the way in which that again, plot holes like that don't really matter in terms of the stories in the ancient world, because the point isn't about it being literal and the kind of rigor and thoroughness of it, in the way that you can tell that the Bible in its current form, someone has gone to efforts to make it like that so that things add up and go together. And generally that tends to be the focus that Christians will have, is proving the literalness of the Bible, as if in some way that is the thing which should convince people. But I mean, personally, for me, I don't think that that is really the thing which will bring the most peace, joy, whatever, good things to people. I think that, I mean, and in that way, it's trying to make faith not too intellectual, in the sense that, I mean, to me, again, faith in God should be primarily an emotional thing, and just a feeling and a sense of being that you have, rather than this kind of abstract thought-based thing. Although you have to have some thoughts, it's, of course, I'm not saying that thinking isn't good. I mean, all of this is very intellectual, what I'm doing now, and it's required thinking to engage in, and talk requires thinking to discuss things with people. But that being said, I think that for too long, the feeling aspect of it and the kind of more deeper psychological meaning that religion has, even beyond just its kind of like, oh, and this means that these rules should be followed because this God exists or whatever, like that's much more like logical and abstract, in a way that is also very exclusionary, and I think again quite patriarchal. And I mean, of course, most of the scribes would have been men, the people who were redacting and editing these documents. And we know they would have been edited because even the term, like the Chaldeans, which is where the people that Abraham is believed to have kind of come from, that word didn't even exist at the time of Moses. It was a later word, because we only have manuscripts from a certain age. So you can't prove anything logically in that way. You end up hitting this wall of faith. Like you just have to trust that these documents are written when they say they are. And so basically it just comes down to trusting the men who copied them. And I mean, I don't know. That's up to you. That's up to everyone. But for me, I think poems and stories and motifs like this, which aren't necessarily exclusionary in the same way, like the story of Inanna, Gilgamesh, and the Tree of Life, which features Lilith. And in that story, Inanna is opposing Lilith, and so Inanna is like the good, positive feminine, the nursing mother, the goddess of love, and then Lilith being one of kind of succubus of destruction or whatever. But again, of course, these are fluid kind of motifs, and a lot of these ancient stories, different gods take on different roles in different stories. It depends on the scenario, which reflects the way in which the dynamics of human psychology are so fluid too, and people can do good things at certain times and bad things at others, and people are very contradictory, and that's life. I mean, that's not a problem. That's just the way that it is, and it's too much of it is bad, and I think we should be working to kind of resolve our contradictions, or in some way just kind of be okay with them, and just yeah, I don't know, just engage in this process of rebirth, this descent into the self, the underworld, the shadow, as Jung terms it, and just think about the way in which everything you do is just a reflection of what you believe and what you've been taught, and that's all the reflection of other people's life experiences, facts the things you think about. It's all conditioned, and just in that way, allow yourself to be free. Allow yourself, you know, that doesn't mean not respecting where you come from. That doesn't mean not connecting with your roots, but know too that there is a freedom there, and that you are not constrained by that, and that there is this process of rebirth open to you if you investigate your subconscious, if you think about why you believe the things you do, if you really break down what you do and why. And yeah, especially thinking about the way in which gender dynamics play into things has been something which has unlocked things for me. And again, just the way in which men and women take on different roles in response to different environments and scenarios, and even the way that um, you know these genders exist in both of us, and in that way, the gods, the angels, the demons, they're all within. It's like, what is an angel? It's like, yeah, it's they're all, an angel is what, I mean, literally it means like a messenger of God. So just any kind of, you know they're often depicted with wings and things like that, but again, wings have that metaphorical symbolic meaning of ascension, and just that connection and union with the divine, with that which is above. But to unite with that which is above, you have to go first into the depths before you can rise. And I think that's what Inanna's story tells us, and so too with the story of Jesus, and he goes down into the harrowing of hell, as it's known. Hell being this temporary place, Sheol, it's called in Judaism, which means the grave, and of course, for a lot of Christians, it's like, well, that makes sense, because what about the people that die before Jesus was born? I mean, they're kind of screwed if, oh, sorry, you didn't believe in Jesus, so you're going to hell forever because you didn't ever hear about him, kind of thing. So Christians just go, oh, well, he went down into hell, preached to the dead. Although they don't like extending that to, oh, and so that means that everyone when they die sees Jesus, and so you don't need to be so in emergency and to push things down people's throats and say things in a way that is jarring and counterproductive often, because there's not that urgency in the same way that a lot of Christians feel. It's like, oh, if I don't tell them about Jesus and they never hear about him, then it's my fault that they've gone to hell forever. And it's like, that just guilt that they're putting on themselves. The way in which institutionalized religion really thrives off their negative emotions, because then it provides a service to kind of, you have to go to them to get rid of that negative emotion, rather than just being able to sit with it and move through it yourself and transmute it. Relying on someone else, takes that magic away from you and gives them the power. And I mean, personally, I'm all for people, taking uh, as much power and autonomy as they can over themselves, and not entering into this parent-child relationship with institutions, the government, whatever entity or group that you have an identity with. Just realizing that really your truest identity is with the divine, with these stories that are timeless, and just most simply the father or the mother, the two entities which every human has. Every human has a father and a mother, um, whether or not they knew them to whatever degree. Um, those are the fundamental persisting archetypes, and the kind of yin yang which generates this world and generates all this, the array of people that can be born and personalities which can form, and different experiences for consciousness, or God to have. God being consciousness, consciousness being the default, and there is consciousness there, even in the dark, and if you just face it, if you just make the descent, then you can be reborn. If we face the things that we're putting off, and don't give in to the fears that we have, but all that stuff is it's all linked in with this, and the grief that we have, the way that we have to learn to forgive ourselves, that's all part of this too. I mean, this is all contained. It's so rich, this tale, this story, for the meaning that people can bring out of it. It's like any poem or whatever. If you're studying it, you realize that all the different interpretations, all the different symbols and motifs people can bring out of things, it's just so rich. And seeing how they overlap, for me, is just so beautiful, and helps me see things as this beautiful tapestry that it all is. And I find some peace in feeling like part of that too, and that my life is just part of the play. And yeah, and then here you go, got the rising after 3 days, the morning star risen again, and got the angel there. And it's interesting, just mention quickly the angel of the Lord, angel of Yahweh, which is mentioned here in the rolling away of the stone from Jesus' tomb, and various other places in the Bible. I would say is probably a good candidate for the Shekinah, the Holy Spirit, the presence of God, this feminine aspect to God, as Christ exits the earth and takes on that feminine motif of Inanna after being 3 days and 3 nights, just like Venus, just like the morning star. And he's released the Holy Spirit too through his death, as the curtain to the temple was torn in two. And the presence is with us all now. And yeah, and people are, I think, moving into a place where we're reincorporating these ancient tales into our understanding of the world as pagan concepts, folk, which is what pagan means, just folk, rural, as these kind of rural traditions are reviving again. People are connecting to the past. I think that we're seeing a revival of this, and as people are becoming more aware of the cycles of the earth, the cycles of the sun, so we're entering this peak of solar activity soon, and the Earth's magnetic field's getting weaker, a lot's happening, and as we're just having to get more in touch with nature, and that after we realize we've been destroying it for so long, and polluting it, and knocking the cycle out of balance. And yeah, Ishtar and Tammuz. Tammuz is another name for Dumuzi, her husband, and Tammuz is even one of the names of the month for a Jewish calendar. In fact, so that really shows just how close the links between Babylon and Judaism are, and the mythologies, especially, and the gods. Here we just got a quick little, visualization of the way in which, as well, the descent of Inanna. It's been theorized, speculated that different kind of components, aspects of it also correspond to the chakras as well, and the descent in that way, and how that mirrors the ascent of the serpent up the spine, and then with the wings, like she was displayed within the initial image I showed. And yeah, you just got the way in which all the different cycles of Venus and how it interacts with the moon, and how it that intersects with the chakras, the 7 chakras, which people also connect to the Tree of Life in Kabbalah, which basically it's like mystical Judaism, linked to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and has this image of the 10 Sephirot, the 10 like emanations of God. And there are many people who will talk on the internet for a lot longer than me about the way in which this mirrors the planets and the human body, and how those two believe to kind of mirror each other. And you have this idea of the microcosm, the macrocosm in the microcosm, and vice versa. And yeah, this idea that it's all just kind of fractals, it's all just repeated patterns. Golden ratio, things like that are always handy things to mention in relation to this topic, in any discussions. And as always, I would love to discuss any of this with anyone, or anything else. And here's just the image of the serpent rising, and this image of Ishtar again. And I think this is probably what the kind of Asherah poles, Asherah figurines would have looked like, the ones that are mentioned in the Bible. And you have the 8-pointed star as well at the top there of her crown, which is one of her symbols, again associated with Christmas, and potentially some association there with Easter, with the rebirth. Again, a whole other video could be done on how the seasons are out of kilter. And but yeah, I'll leave that to one side. Again, here we've just got a quick image of that kind of cyclical, infinite nature to reality. And here, of course, you got the feminine, the mother, on the side of the new life, because how that's what she is, and without the Holy Spirit we can't be born to new life. That's what is received at baptism. That's the breath in our lungs, and she's all around us, and within. And I really do pray that we can all reconnect to her, and that she might continue to rise in this world that's been for so long under the shadow of death, which is often characterized as male as it is here, but of course also has this feminine quality to it as the darkness, and of course these genders are interchangeable, as everything is. It doesn't have to not contradict each other. It's just a story. It's just a story. And yeah, well, just a little other thing to mention, of course. You might find it interesting to think about the connection as well that there is between, especially Ishtar, with cannabis, which is one of the ingredients listed in the incense for the temple as well, in Exodus, although it's mistranslated in Greek manuscripts, just as the gender of the Holy Spirit is probably, in my opinion. And yeah, I think it's interesting to think about that as well, and the way in which more rural approaches to medicine, nature-based medicines, and the practices that go along with that, like shamanism and things like that, how they have been sidelined and ridiculed in the modern world, in the patriarchal industrial world, particularly in the West, of course, just that culture that comes along with it more than anything. Uh, yeah, and just thinking about the way in which as cannabis gets legalized, it looks like it will be at varying rates and speeds in different places in the world. What change that will promote in people's thinking and the way in which, as a psychoactive substance, a psychedelic, it does have the capacity to expand your mind, and in particular with cannabis, kind of internally delve into the subconscious. And a lot of people on the internet, I'm sure, would say it is something which can be a beneficial tool for meditation, shadow work, all that kind of thing. Although not without its risks, of course. And yeah, I mean, I'll leave it at that. But yeah, something I think which is interesting to think about, as a lot more research is being done on these things, when for the last 100 years they've been kind of outlawed, even though even up to the Victorian ages they were using opium, cannabis, coke, everything, liberally. And there's just been this kind of panic in the 20th century to moralize a lot of things, and mass media has probably enabled a lot of that, a lot of lies to be spun. But yeah, here's an image of Queen of Heaven, which I just wanted to kind of make sure was in here. This depiction is probably of Mary, because that's how the Queen of Heaven is how the Catholics refer to Mary, and that's the way in which the feminine is still kind of honored even in these monotheistic religions. It has to be, because there's this psychological need for it, for that symbol of the mother, of rebirth and birth. And yeah, I just pray that the Holy Spirit, the dove here depicted above, might continue to just reveal herself in all the different forms to people that she takes, and that just more of her infinite and constantly morphing nature might be known to us all, and that we might all rise on wings like angels, and that she might open up the door to us into the darkness, into the universe, to fly among the stars. Yeah, I don't know what else to say really. But yeah, thank you for listening, for watching. If you got this far, and I'd love to hear from you on anything. Please leave a comment if you're interested. If you want to talk, message me. If you like this video, consider leaving a like or subscribing, I guess. And yeah, I just so grateful to be here and be able to do this and express myself in this way, and for all the stars that guide us and the gods. And yeah, I just pray just for more of you, God. And thank you. Speak to you soon. Peace.